Hello students, welcome to my live teaching learning session of BSOG 173 Rethinking Development. Today is the third session of this paper. We have done Unit 1, Unit 2 in block number 1. Now today we will discuss about Unit 3 in which developed, developing and underdeveloped. We will discuss about all these types of economies, what is the meaning of developed and what type of economy is called developed economy, what type of economy is called developing, and what are the main characteristics of underdeveloped economies. These three concepts are different from one another and each other. So, developed, developing, and underdeveloped, what is the difference between these three concepts and what is the meaning of these three concepts and what are the main features which classify and which create the difference between these three types of economies. So let us start from the first topic. What is the meaning of underdeveloped economy? First of all, we have to understand about meaning of underdeveloped. Underdeveloped economy is that economy in which resources are unutilized or underutilized. If unutilized human and natural resources are in the economy, that type of economy is called underdeveloped economy. Next is low per capita income. In underdeveloped economy, per capita income or per person income remains always lower. Why? Because these economies have less national income. That's why these economies are called underdeveloped economy. They can't fully develop without capital formation and without money and other fully utilization of all the available resources. In underdeveloped economy, economic performance remains low and inefficient and conventional techniques of production used by underdeveloped countries. Underdeveloped economy always use inefficient and backward and conventional technologies for the production of goods and services due to the lack of capital formation. They have less capital due to less national income, less per capita income. If per capita income is lower, then saving capacity will be lower, and if saving is lower, then investment will also remain lower. And if investment is lower, then how economy can use modern and advanced technologies for the production of goods and services? So these economies always use inefficient and conventional methods and technologies for the production of goods and services. Next is in these economies, good potential prospects and enthusiasm in its people, but not fully used because resources are underutilized due to lack of capital formation, but the country people have good potential prospects and enthusiasm, but how their enthusiasm and potential can be fully utilized if we remove all the hurdles, all the obstacles from these economies, then underdeveloped economy can grow and it will reach at the position of developed or developing economies. So this is the meaning of an underdeveloped economy. Next is underdevelopment and development. What is the difference between these two concepts, underdevelopment and development? Underdevelopment is a contemporary and global fact, especially after World War II It emphasized issue and concern by developed and underdeveloped countries because until 1920 the fastest population increase was belonged to rich countries. With the First World War, this situation reversed or totally changed. Mortality in poor countries decreased because of the medical improvements. On the contrary, population increased rapidly. So, underdeveloped countries realized their situation and wanted to develop by the effect of bipolar system sites. Also, techniques introduced for economic improvement, and economic improvement is the consequence of advancement of modern technologies. If we use modern and advanced technologies, if we improve our infrastructure, and if we move towards industrialization, then we can reach at the position of developed countries. So basic difference between underdevelopment and development is underdeveloped economy is that economy in which population remains higher, national income remains lower, per capita income remains lower. Due to low per capita income, saving capacity of the country people remains also lower. If saving is lower, then how we can invest money in business organization? Definitely, if saving is lower, investment will also remain lower. And due to lack of capital formation and due to low investment, country people will not get employment opportunities. They will remain poor, and this is the main feature of underdevelopment. If country people are unemployed, country people are poor, and backward technologies are using for the production of goods and services, and inefficient use of technology, and underutilization of available human resources and natural resources exist, that type of economy is called underdeveloped economy. And if technical advancement is going on, we are moving towards industrialization, and our country people are growing to growing at the faster rate. Their standard of living is improving, and they are earning higher income. Then our economy will grow, and we will be called developed economy. So this is the meaning of underdevelopment and development. Next is developed versus developing countries. We have talked about the developed, and what is the meaning of development and underdevelopment. Now we are discussing here developed and developing countries. What is the basic difference between developed and developing countries? Developed countries are also called industrialized countries, and developing countries are called third world countries. Why? Developed countries are why it is called industrialized, because here is the form of government democracy, free market economy is followed by developed countries. Free market economy is that economy in which government does not interfere in any market activities. All market activities are mainly followed by or smoothly run by demand and supply. And this is called price mechanism. Price mechanism is a system through which we can determine each and every commodity's price with the help of demand and supply curve analysis. So free market economy is called capitalist economy, and free market economy is called laissez-faire economy, and free market economy is called invisible hand economy. So almost all developed countries adopted this capitalist system, and in this system government does not play important role to manage economic activities are smoothly managed by price mechanism, and price mechanism work with the help of demand and supply curve. And in developed countries there is a lack of corruption. This is the most important factor that each and every country can be called developed or underdeveloped. If there is no corruption, then country will be called developed. And if there is a lot of corruption exist in the economy, that economy can't reach at the position of developed countries. Like in Africa continent, there is too much corruption. That's why African continent is still developing, not developed. Indian economy is also developing economy, not well developed. Why? Its reason is here also corruption exists. So free market economy is the main feature of developed countries. And second main feature of developed countries is lack of corruption. There is no corruption. That's why they are going on the path of development. And they are more dependent on manufacturing rather than agriculture. They are producing more goods and services by using advanced technologies, and they are giving more focus on industrial products, manufacturing products rather than agriculture. For example, in USA, only 1% country people are engaged in agricultural activities. But only 1% people, they are giving more contribution in agriculture, and they can produce for their country people's survival and for exports also. It means they have good potential, and they can produce more goods and services. That's why only 1% country people can produce a lot of agriculture production, through which they can use for their own consumption, and they can sell it to abroad also. But in India, here 50% or more than 50% country people are still engaged in agricultural activities, but their contribution or per person contribution in GDP is less. That's why our economy is called developing economy, and other countries' economy is called developed economy, because they are more dependent on manufacturing sector rather than agriculture sector. And prevalent technology, they have good and prevalent technologies, they use modern technologies, they do more efforts for the innovations of new technologies, and the government spend lot of money on research and development. That's why their economy is very developed economy. For example, USA economy is well developed economy. Japan is the well developed country and technologically very advanced country. Germany, France, and all European countries are called developed countries. And in developing countries, these developing countries are called third world countries. Like China economy is developing, Indian economy is developing, and the neighboring countries of Indian economy is also called developing, and some countries are called underdeveloped. Why? Because in developing countries, here industrial sector is less developed or underdeveloped. Here is a lack of modern technologies. And here is the low level of education. At present in India, near about 40% country people are still illiterate. They are not literate. And less country people are highly educated. Here is the lack of or low level of healthcare or medical facilities. Life expectancy is also lower in developing countries. For example, in India, here life expectancy is near about 65 year age. And in developed countries, life expectancy is very higher, near about 80-year age or 90-year age is the average age in those countries who are well developed. Next is the examples of developing countries are Mexico, Brazil, South Africa, Thailand, India, China, and other neighboring countries of India. All these countries are called developing countries. So, developing countries are those countries in which low level of industrialization or underdeveloped industries and lack of modern technologies. We still use backward and obsolete technologies for the production of goods and services. And in developing countries, there is a lower level of educational facilities, medical facilities, and here it's very less life expectancy age. And example of these countries are Mexico, Brazil, South Africa, and Thailand. Next is, now we can make distinguish between all these three types of countries: developed, developing, and underdeveloped countries. Because we have discussed about these three concepts. One is underdevelopment, second is developed, and third is developing. Now we can make difference between these three concepts: developed country, developing country, and underdeveloped countries. Developed countries are those countries that have a high quality of life. High quality of life means higher standard of living of the country people. And these economies are well developed economy and technologically highly infrastructure is very good and technologically very advanced. So developed economy and developed countries are those countries that have high quality of life, are developed economy, and technologically or good infrastructure exist there. In developing countries are those countries with a less developed industrial base and a comparatively lower HDI. HDI is Human Development Index. And Human Development Index is the mixture of three concepts, because human development index has three components, and we include three components. These are: one is life expectancy, second is literacy rate, and third is per person contribution in GDP. In India, here life expectancy is less and still illiteracy exists, and per person contribution in GDP is also very less. That's why in India, the rank of India in HDI is very lower. So developing countries are those countries with a less developed industrial base, mainly agricultural dependent countries, and predominance of agriculture exists in developing countries, and a comparatively lower human development index relative to developed countries. And underdeveloped countries are those countries having the lowest indicator of socio-economic development with the lowest high HDI rating. It means underdeveloped countries are those countries which have less per capita income, less national income, lower standard of living of the country people, lower facilities of educational and medical facilities, and lowest indicators of socio-economic development, and the lower rating in HDI, Human Development Index. Now, next is in developed countries, GDP remains always higher. What is GDP? GDP is the gross domestic product, and GDP refers to the sum total of all final goods and services which are produced in a domestic territory in an accounting year. And GDP in this all sectors contributed, like agriculture sector, secondary sector which is known as manufacturing sector, and third is tertiary sector. If all those sectors give more contribution in the production of goods and services, then GDP will remain higher. So in developed countries, GDP always remains higher. In developing countries, GDP remains middle, not higher, not lower, only middle or moderate. In underdeveloped countries, GDP remains always lower. Third is, in developed countries, HDI rating is higher. In developing countries, HDI rating is middle, and in underdeveloped countries, HDI rating is lower. In developed countries, easy access to the latest technologies, advancement, and enjoy good health care, education, and other services. In developed countries, education facilities are more, near about 100% or 99% or 98%, or in some countries 90% country people are educated, not only literate, they are educated, and they enjoy latest technological advancement and enjoy good health care, education, and other services. But in developing countries, have some access to technology and healthcare, education, and other services, not too much services exist in developing countries. And in underdeveloped countries, situation is reversed. Here is poor access to technology, education, healthcare, or other services. In developed countries, standard of living remains always higher. In developing countries, standard of living remains middle, not higher, not lower, and underdeveloped countries, standard of living remains lower. For example, of developed countries, Norway, Denmark, Austria, US, Switzerland, Canada, Japan, all these countries are called Russia, all these countries are called developed countries. And developing countries, for example, India, Indonesia, Nigeria is the African country, Saudi Arabia, and Russia, but Russia is developed, and South Korea. All these countries are called developing countries. And for example, of underdeveloped countries like Afghanistan, Bhutan, Cambodia, Malawi, Madagascar, and Liberia. Madagascar and Liberia or Malawi. Madagascar and Liberia is the African countries, and Afghanistan, Bhutan is the neighboring countries of India, Cambodia, Malawi. All these countries are called underdeveloped or less developed countries. So this is the main difference between developed, developing, and underdeveloped countries. Now, in this block 1, unit 3, we will discuss about in detail developed, developing, and underdeveloped. In this, we will study about understanding the categorization, why these countries are classified, and what are the basic features of these three concepts. What is the difference between these three concepts we have discussed here, and developed countries, developing countries, and underdeveloped countries, how different economics define these concepts, and what is the development debate and dependency theory. What is this, the meaning of dependency theory? Now we will all these things discuss in detail in this unit 3. The term development is difficult to define as the definition is dependent on the context in which it is being used. Although it is used frequently in day-to-day conversations and political discussions, where there are some assumed notion attached to it by the user of the term. The first clarification to be made here is that the term development may refer to many domains of knowledge like personality, maturity, education, organism, cognitive, moral, learning, psychology, life, language, adulthood, etc. So, development, this term we can use in different way, and in so many ways we can define this concept of development. The term also refers to a number of characterization such as demographic change, economic growth, increased use of resources, modernization, and higher level of technology and politically freedom. If we want to define this concept, development, so development uh, include lots of characterization like demographic change if population is less in country, economy is growing, and the increased use of resources, we are fully utilizing all the available resources and optimally use all the available resources. Modernization is going on, we are using modern technologies, advanced technologies, and politically our economy is free and political freedom exists, then we can say that economy is developed or economy is going on the path of development. Understanding the categorization related to development. How we can classify between these three countries and we can make the difference between these three nations. After differentiating the synonyms terms, let us discuss the characterization of development. Development studies is an area of research, have their origin in the aftermath of World War II with the reconstruction of war ravaged countries and its attendant economic development. The origin of development as an ideology can be traced to the era of industrialization in the 19th century. Further, if we look into the history of this concept, we will find that the recovery of various countries after World War II and the decolonizing process led as the foundation for development as policy. You know that First World War happened at what time period? 1914 to 1919 or 1918? And in Second World War time period is 1939 to 45. And after this World War II, and because before that some countries are colonized by European countries, and after World War II and decolonizing process led as the foundation for development as policy. The conceptualization strengthened further with the focus of addressing of major social problems of poverty, unemployment, and social exclusion. This is said by United Nations in 1995 report of the World Summit for Social Development that the conceptualization strengthened further with the focus of addressing of major social problems exist in so many countries like poverty, unemployment, and social exclusion. Webster in 1990 argued that for understanding the development related problems, we need to examine the place of poor countries globally in terms of their social and economic relationship with each other. Secondly, it is of prime consideration to also study particular features of particular societies in terms of the effect which development will make on it. One also need to analyze interactional outcomes of the cultural and economic process with regard to social development. So Webster argued that the understanding of development which is related with so many problems, so we need to examine the problem of poor countries and the place of poor countries where they exist in global world. So, the place of poor countries globally in terms of their social and economic conditions or relationship with each other. That's why categorization of countries are necessary to understand. Developed, developing, and underdeveloped. According to Simon Kunz-Nates in 1968, the distinction between developed and underdeveloped or developing countries was announced by United Nations in its National Account Statistics Yearbook of 1965. It means, first of all, the distinction between developed, developing, and underdeveloped economies announced by United Nations in which book National Account Statistics Yearbook in 1965. While excluding the communist countries, the list included North America, for example, the United States and Canada, Europe, Oceania, largely Australia and New Zealand, Japan, South Africa in developing countries group, Asia excluding Japan, Africa excluding South Africa, and Latin America were kept in the developing countries group. Kuznets argue to include USSR and some countries of Eastern Europe in the developed group list because USSR is at present is called Russia, and at present this country is well developed. So Kuznets also argue to include USSR and some other countries of Eastern Europe in the list of developed countries. Kuznets also argue to include USSR and some countries to Eastern Europe in the developed group list. However, the issue of characterization is not very easy as there are complexities involved in the reasons for developed states or for few countries by using political advantages in the form of resources utilization and monopolies over trade and commerce. You know that some countries have great monopoly power over using the available resources and they have monopoly over trade and commerce. That's why the issue of characterization between developed, developing, and underdevelopment is not very easy. It's very complicated process. It's very complicated system which involved in the reason for developed state of few countries by its politically advantages in the form of resource utilization and monopolies over trade and commerce. On the other hand, the issue becomes debatable as the dichotomous division of countries into developing and developed also invite the policy level issues like transferring of resources from developed countries to developing countries. At present, this is going on that at present the resources like technological resources, capital resources, natural resources are coming from developed countries to developing countries. So this issue is very debatable because there is a dichotomous. Dichotomous means when two words are jointly attached like day, night, and same as this happiness and sadness. These concepts are called dichotomous and dichotomous division of countries like rural, urban, male, female, life, death. All these concepts are called dichotomous, same as developed and developing economies are the issue of debatable as the dichotomous division of countries like developing and developed also invite the policy level issues like transferring of resources from developed countries to developing countries. Now, uh, in 19, Bhagwati is also great economist, and Bhagwati in 1971 argues that the choice of word depends on the sensitivity of the analyst and the author. If we will look into the methodology of World Bank using the World Bank Atlas method for classification of different countries for the year 2020, we may find that the countries having a GNI is gross national income per capita between $1,026 and $3,995 are termed as low income countries. It means World Bank uh, categorized development, developing, and underdevelopment with the help of this indicator like gross national income. In those countries whose gross national income lies in between of $1,026 to $3,995, that type of countries are called low income countries. And countries with a GNI, like gross national income per capita, lies between $3,996 and $12,375 are kept in lower middle income group. And the countries having a GNI per capita of more than $12,376 or more are called as upper middle income countries. This is this classification is made by World Bank. World Bank clearly state that those countries which have less per capita GNI, that is called less developed countries or low income countries, and whose per capita GNI lies in between of 3,996 and in between of 12,375, then these are called lower middle income group countries or developing countries. And the other, on the other hand, the countries having a higher GNI per capita like 12,376 dollar and above this or more are called as upper middle income economies. Next is developed countries. The above discussion helps us at least to pull up few criteria like developed economy with comparatively advanced level of technology and good infrastructure with the addition of the comparison of higher living standard of the country people or citizens of the particular countries. Their gross domestic product, their gross national product, and their per capita income remains always higher. It may broadly be used as the scale for determining the developed countries. So, developed countries stand as synonymous to industrialized countries, which have advanced economies, which have good industrialization facilities. So, developed countries are those countries which have high national income, high per capita income, high standard of living, less population, less poverty, less unemployment, less corruption, higher education, high medical facility, good industrialization, high infrastructure, and strong infrastructure, and politically freedom and free market economy. That type of economy is called developed countries, in which all features included and high standard of living of the country people also. Next is United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan has defined a developed country as follows. A developed country is one that allows all its citizens to enjoy a free and healthy life in a safe environment. So, according to the General Secretary of United Nations, Kofi Annan, that developed country is called that country in which all country people enjoy a free and healthy life in a safe environment. Now, what is the meaning of developing countries? Developing countries are those countries which have higher population or huge population. Developing countries constitute the majority of the population and the area of the world. According to an estimate, the developing countries cover around 75% of the total land area and approximately 85% of the total population of the world live in developing countries. Land area is 75%, but the total population is 85%, more than the land area. To determine the status of a country as developing, the criteria of gross domestic product per capita is used. This means that all the goods and services produced by a country in a year when analyzed as US dollar. According to the WTO, World Trade Organization, two-thirds of its member countries fall in the category of developing countries. Only one-third is called developed, and two-thirds of the member countries at present, around 160 countries or 157 or 158 countries are the member countries of WTO, and India was the founder member of WTO, and India joined GATT, General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, in 1948. And according to this World Bank, World Trade Organization, GATT name was changed in 1995, and after 1995, GATT is converted into WTO, World Trade Organization. And according to this World Trade Organization, around two-thirds of its member countries fall in the category of which countries? Developing countries. So developing countries are those countries which have higher population and less land area capacity. And we can define these developing countries according to the GDP or gross domestic product per capita. This term can be used for the definition, giving definition of or defining the concept of developing countries. Next is underdeveloped countries. Underdeveloped countries are those countries which provides a very unique three-divisional segment to describe the difference between different types of countries in the world. CM in 2018 says that some countries are there whose citizens spend lots of money for keeping the weight low. Second type of countries whose citizens eat to live, and the third type of countries whose citizens do not know from where the subsequent meals will come from. Somehow, the last category is somehow related to the underdeveloped countries. The third type of countries whose citizens do not know from where the subsequent meals will come from. So last category is related with underdeveloped countries. And developed countries spend lot of money for keeping the weight low. And in developing countries, citizens eat to live. And the third type of country in which citizens don't know from where the subsequent meal will come from, that type of country is called underdeveloped countries, where survival of people creates lots of questions before ruling elites. Here it becomes pertinent to relate the idea of colonialism and new colonialism. At the time of colonialism, some countries' situation worsened and they become poorer. And after colonialized time period or after decolonization system, these economies follow the path of development and they make that type of policy which is necessary for their development. So underdeveloped countries and CM in 2018 provides a unique three divisional segment, and these three segments are: one is that in developed countries citizens spend lots of money for keeping the weight lower, and in developing countries citizens eat to live, and in third type of countries or underdeveloped countries, citizens don't know where the subsequent meal come from. So very nicely differentiate between these three concepts, and this differentiation is given by CM in 2018. Now, World Development Report said that low-income countries is those countries in which GNI, gross national income per capita of $906 and below that, that type of countries called low-income countries. And middle-income countries income lie in between of 906 to $11,115, and above this 11,116 or more than that, that is called high income countries. Time to time this criteria changed because as well as time passes and the standard of living and the national income of the country is increasing, this rank of GNI per capita is also going to change. Next is, according to Andrea Gunder Frank, the former colonial nations were underdeveloped because of their dependence on Western industrialized nations in the areas of foreign trade and investment. Most of the developing countries and underdeveloped countries are still dependent on developed nations or Western countries or Western industrialized nations in the area of foreign trade and investment. These relationships stunted their development. The reason these places are poor and underdeveloped are because of the structure of exploitation, capitalism, and world trade. Modernization tends to forget the historic experience of the third world. To study the relationship between developed countries, developing countries, dependency theory was developed in the late 1950s under the guidance of the director of the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America, Raul Parrish. It means the theory of dependency or dependency theory was propounded by Raul Parrish in late 1950s. What is the meaning of this dependency theory? We will discuss about this. Dependency theory or dependencia theory is a body of social science. It's a body of social science theories predicated on the notion that resources flow from a periphery of poor and underdeveloped states to a core means wealthy states, and reaching the latter at the expense of the former. It is a central contention of dependency theory that poor states are impoverished and rich ones enriched by the way poor states are integrated into the world system. So, dependency theory was developed by Paul Rolf Parrish in the late 1950s under the guidance of the director of the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America, Rolf Parrish. Here, economy is classified into core. Core is the developed countries. Semi-periphery is the developing countries, and periphery is underdeveloped countries. And why these countries, core countries, are mainly dependent upon underdeveloped countries and developing countries for their growth and development? Because developed countries are using the resources like natural resources, human resources, capital resources, or human resources and mainly natural resources from developing or underdeveloped countries. For example, in African continent is rich in natural resources, and manpower is also very large there. So, developed countries are dependent upon African continent for the development of their economy. They are using their natural resources for their own benefit. They are using manpower of the African continent people. They are using for their own benefit, and these economies are improving in a very good way, but underdeveloped economy or developing economy who are the supporter of developed economy, they are still underdeveloped or less developed. Now, the dependency theory predicated on the notion that resources flow from a periphery of poor, underdeveloped countries to a core. Core means wealthy states or developed countries, and reaching the latter at the cost of, at the expenses of the former. So Parrish, along with the others, found that poor countries do not necessarily get benefited by the advancement of the industrialization. On the contrary, the economic advancement of the richer countries frequently leads to economic struggle, because this dependency theory explain that how rich and poor gaps is going to increase, and rich countries are becoming more richer and poor countries are becoming more poorer. Rich countries are doing more advancement and producing more at the cost of poor countries. That's why the economic advancement of the richer countries frequently leads to economic struggle or class struggle and problems of for the poor countries. The development debate. Now, what is the meaning of this development debate? Immanuel Wallerstein world system theory talks about the divided world on the basis of economic development. The very levels of differentiations in the forms of government as both developed and underdeveloped countries have been labeled as core. Core is wealthy states and periphery is poor states or underdeveloped countries, respectively. The growth of inequality revealed or shown by dependency theory and world system theory. So this is the development debate. That debate is uh, in between of this division of developed and underdevelopment. And this debate was said by Immanuel Wallerstein, World System Theory, talk about this divide world on the basis of their economic development. That some countries are growing at the very faster rate. That type of countries are called poor economies, and periphery or poor countries are those countries in which uh, inequality and low per capita income, low national income exist. It means rich countries are doing more progress at the cost of poor countries. They are using their resources and they are using for their own benefit, but poor countries are not getting any advantages from poor countries. In some cases, the sole pursuit of economic growth will bring about more problems, which in turn does harm to progress. Global and regional inequality, mentioned above, is one example. Second example is developed, developing, and underdeveloped, the failure of poverty reduction, which was a central aspect to show the consequences of unequal economic system. Under this economic centered development paradigm, it is taken for granted that poverty eradication can be naturally achieved with economic growth. As well as economy is growing, then we can reduce this poverty problem. However, with condition of inequality, poverty is not reduced but becomes worse within an unequal economic system. Another important problem is that the sole pursuit of economic growth is often based on the high cost of natural resources. And this in turn causes serious environmental problem. We are moving on the path of development at the cost of environmental degradation. Secondly, the economy centered development paradigm has been criticized on the basis that development has become a discourse that creates the power relationship between developed and underdeveloped countries or social groups. Third, the top bottom approach adopted in the economic centered development process is criticized for overlooking the localities and subjectivity of local people. And fourth is the presumption that traditional society is backward and underdeveloped often cause damage to traditional culture and local relationship. So these are the debate which make difference between how developed economies affected to underdeveloped and developing countries. The term development now extends to far wider horizons such as socio-cultural aspects rather than merely economic development. Moreover, many scholars suggest a bottom-up approach such as participatory development approach by involving local participation and local knowledge during the development planning and decision making. Thus, the understanding of development is no longer limited to economic growth only, but rather it is extended to expanding people's choices and capabilities according to same in 1989. Now, let us sum up. Now, we can conclude from the above discussion, which we have done in Unit 3, Developed, Developing, and Underdeveloped Countries. In this unit, we explored the categorization of countries in terms of developed, developing, and underdeveloped. This categorization helps us to partially understand, not fully, partially understand the developed market economy countries as first world countries which are industrialized or are in the process of industrialization and are centrally directed as second world, and the least developed and poor countries are called third world countries. Immanuel Wallstein's world system theory talk about the divided world on the basis of economic development. So we can conclude that important goal of an economy is to achieve high economic growth rate and to raise the living standard of the country people. So economy have a great capacity to produce more goods and services, and economy can reduce poverty and unemployment. If these problems solved and GDP increases at a higher rate, then we can reach on the position of development. Thank you.